Hello, and welcome to first of 3 interviews for Women's History Month. I'm Julia Boyd, and I am with Lyla Harrod, and I'm going to be asking her some questions. So, can you start by telling us a little bit about your background and, how you got into hiking?
Sure, yeah. So I grew up here in Danvers. I lived here for quite a long time. Let's see, I wasn't much of a hiker, but I did like going outside. I like to hang out at the parks. I played lots of sports. So I've always enjoyed being in the outdoors. When I was in my early 20s, I moved out to Seattle, and in Seattle there is access to a lot of different mountains. There's the Cascades and the Olympics, which are two, world-class mountain ranges. And I had a friend who was willing to sort of take me out and teach me the ropes and help me figure out like what I needed as far as equipment, and then how to comport myself safely in the outdoors. So I just I've always loved being in the outdoors, but then getting access to hiking and having a friend to do it with, that is what sort of got me into hiking. I eventually moved back to this area, and I worked in Danvers for a long time. And while I was working here, I was taking lots of trips out to western Massachusetts, to the trails out there. There's trails right in this area here, too, that I'll talk about a little bit. And spending some time up in New Hampshire, too, when I had some time. So, I've always sort of prioritized hiking and being in the outdoors, it's always been an important part of my life.
So, on your blog, you wrote about all the processes that you went through before, fully committing to hiking the AT. So you had a lot of considerations, and was there an aha moment? When did you feel that you were really ready?
So I just hiked the Appalachian Trail last year, and I'm 34. I was 33 at that time. I had gotten sober and gone through a gender transition when I was 30 years old. So I had throughout my 20s, I didn't have the same capacity that I had, whether it was physically or mentally or financially, because of, I wasn't, living a healthy lifestyle, and I wasn't taking care of myself, and I wasn't living as my authentic self. I didn't really have the same ability that I had once I got sober and transitioned. And I found that once I did, I felt a lot stronger. My mental health improved greatly. I was in a better position financially, and I felt more confident and assured in myself. And once I sort of felt all those things becoming, my new reality as who I was, hiking the Appalachian Trail became something that was a lot more feasible. It's something that I'd always been aware of. I had known about the Appalachian Trail through hiking in Massachusetts and through hiking in New Hampshire, but it always seemed like an unattainable goal, essentially. And once I, was in a much better position after getting sober and transitioning, I was able to do it. So I think just the moment, it was probably maybe earlier on in the pandemic, right around the beginning, when I think a lot of people were sort of evaluating their lives and where they were. And I started taking stock of things and realized, hey, I can do this, and this has been a lifelong goal of mine. And I wasn't getting any younger, so I figured, why not go out and make my own dream come true.
So what were people's response when you told them you were going to hike the trail?
I got mixed responses. I think that, my friends and family, they all knew that I loved hiking, and that it was one of the most important things to me. And I spent so much time doing it. So I think that while they were surprised, they didn't think it was totally out of the blue, because of how much time I invested in the outdoors. I definitely got a lot of people who were surprised. Maybe they had never even heard of the Appalachian Trail, so they were like, why would you want to go and live outside for, months at a time? Aren't there bears? I got all sorts of questions. I had a lot of people ask me if I was going to carry a gun. That was a big one. If I was worried and if I was going to need to carry a gun. So I think that there's just a lot of misconceptions around what hiking and what spending time in the outdoors is, and what it isn't. And so yeah, I got the widest range. I would say that most of the people that I talked to were just really excited for me, with a little bit of like worry and concern, since it was something I hadn't done before, and it seems like a really big risk. Yeah, I mean, the Appalachian Trail, it's 2,200 miles long and runs up the East Coast. And when most people try to hike it, they do not make it. So it's somewhere around 20% of people who start trying to hike the whole thing actually make it to the end. So statistically, I was unlikely to finish, but I did end up finishing, and we could talk about that more. But yeah.
So you wrote a really in-depth post about ways to be a trans competent on the trail, and of course a lot that you can be translated into being trans competent in our everyday lives. Can you talk a little bit more about the culture of the hiking community? Is it largely LGBTQ plus friendly or not?
So I think that the outdoor and hiking community, they have a lot of work to do, just like everyone does. They are their own microcosm and their own community, and I think that lots of people there are accepting, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Just like anywhere, you have a wide range of people and experiences. As far as like the trans competence on the trail, I would say that most people weren't necessarily even aware of what trans people were, or if they were, it was what they had seen on the news, or some maybe a stereotype that they had about somebody, maybe from the media or something that they had heard of. But I found that a lot of people didn't actually have experience like face to face with a trans person, trans person at all, trans woman, and I was the first trans person that a lot of those people had met, and that doesn't mean that they were that they weren't friendly, or that they weren't, that they. I had very warm reception from the vast majority of people that I ran into. Their intent was always positive. That doesn't mean that they knew everything that there was to know about trans identities, but a lot of them were very interested in learning, and I had a lot of really great conversations with people while hiking trails about my own identity, because they genuinely wanted to know, and they genuinely wanted to understand me. And one of the things that came up a lot is that people would ask me sort of questions about trans people as a whole, and it's difficult because trans people's experiences can vary so wildly, right? Like, we all have different experiences, and our identities all look different. So we're not a monolith, and there's nothing about my experience everyone's experience isn't going to line up in the same way. So yeah, I think that it was a huge opportunity for me to meet people who may not have had that interaction otherwise, and for people to ask some questions, maybe some burning questions that they hadn't felt comfortable asking before. But with me, they felt comfortable doing it while we're hiking down the trail. So that's pretty cool.
So our next question comes from Kathy Simon. What are some of the strongest groups that exist for trans hikers?
I mean, there aren't that many formal groups that exist for trans hikers. There are, general hiking groups that exist, and there are a couple, like Facebook groups and things like that for queer hikers. But for trans hikers, there really wasn't much at all. When I decided to through hike the Appalachian Trail, through hiking is when you hike end to end a long distance backpacking trail. And when I decided to do that, I Googled trans thru hikers, just to see other people, to try and learn from them, try and maybe get in touch with them, ask them some questions about what their experience was like, so I could know what to expect. And I got next to nothing in a Google search result, which you'd think that there would be something, but really there wasn't. There was a couple, like maybe one or two, sort of indirect topics related. And that was, kind of jarring for me, because nobody wants to feel like they're out there, like they're the only person who's doing something, or like it's never been done before. And, if it hasn't been done before, why, right? Like, is it, is there some danger to everything? So as a result of that, I decided to start doing some writing for an outdoor blog, an outdoor website called The Trek. And that's where I started writing, about my experiences there, because I wanted people, other people like me, when they Google, trans thru hiker in the future, I wanted there to be hits. I wanted there to be information. I wanted them to have to know that they were not the only person out there doing that. And the really cool thing that I found once I did start doing that is that other trans hikers did reach out to me. They felt like they'd find me, and we ended up sort of developing our own little community. It was informal, but we had like group chats, and we had ways of staying in touch, so that we had people, a support group that we could rely on. We started a Discord server, so that's how we stay in touch. And so it's not formal, but we are a small, mini but mighty group of trans hikers, and it's really important to have that community.
So back to your hike, do you have any animal stories?
I do. I ran into a lot of interesting animals out there. I think the one that people asked me about the most, I said bears, right? So I ran into a bunch of bears on the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail goes through 14 different states, and the state that I saw the most bears in was Connecticut, which I don't think people really think of Connecticut as like having bears all over the place, but I saw a bunch of bears in Connecticut, so that was cool. I also, when I was in Maine, I saw a pine marten, which is kind of like a weasel kind of thing. They're really, really rare, and so I was lucky to run into one very up close, and it pretty much just screamed at me the whole time. But I was just like, this is so magical, even the things just like, like yelling at me. But we had a connection. I could feel it. Yeah, the pine marten was feeling the connection as well. I also ran into rattlesnakes throughout. I mean, we'd see snakes almost every day in places like Virginia. There were some other, porcupines. We saw porcupines a lot. Porcupines are really can be a huge nuisance on the trail. They're very drawn to salt. That's one of the things that drives them. So they really want to taste anything that's salty. So if your legs are sweaty and they're sticking out of your sleeping bag, a porcupine might just come up and start licking your leg. Or if you've been sweating all over your backpack, they might start licking your backpack, and you wake up with a porcupine licking your backpack in the middle of the night. Mice are also a really big issue with the Appalachian Trail because there's shelters. They're basically like wooden cabins, 3-sided cabins, and it's just the perfect place for mice to hang out. So mice will just take over these places, and then there's a whole bunch of dirty, gross hikers who sleep in there, and the mice will just crawl right up. My very first night on trail, I had a mouse climb up onto my head and run over my head, and I screamed loudly and woke everyone up in the shelter. So that was a great way to start my hike. That was the Appalachian Trail. I also ran into when I hiked the Arizona Trail afterwards in the fall, and I ran into a bunch of tarantulas. They were really fun to run into. They were pretty tough little animals. Obviously I'm like 1,000 times bigger than a tarantula, but if I came up to a tarantula, it'd sort of rear up on its hind legs like it was about to attack me, like I was the one who was supposed to be nervous. And I appreciated that about them. I really appreciated the confidence that they showed there. I also saw a lot of coyotes in Arizona. I shouldn't say that I saw that many coyotes. I heard coyotes all the time. Like in the evening, they like to sing, and they'll hang out in packs a lot of times, and they'll just sort of, sing and bark and yip, and it's kind of like a really beautiful thing to go to sleep to. And then just lots of like elk and deer all the time. And lots of snakes. Actually, I almost stepped on a rattlesnake in Arizona. My friend had to tell me that I had just stepped over one. So very, barely avoided a really, really bad, potentially fatal situation in that situation. But hey, I didn't step on it, and I'm here, so all good.
So at this point, you've done the AT, the Bay Circuit Trail, and Arizona, and now you're heading to the Pacific Coast. So
Yeah.
how do you decide what adventure you're headed to?
So after I had finished so I did the Appalachian Trail first, and then I hiked the Bay Circuit Trail, which is a 230-mile trail just right here in the Boston area. So people should check that one out. And then I did the Arizona Trail. So I had, after this past year, I had pretty much realized that this is something that's really important to me, and it's just my favorite thing to do. And I wanted to invest myself and my time and my life for the time being in hiking, in long distance hiking. So I had decided to hike the Continental Divide Trail, which runs down Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. And I was planning on doing that this spring, but I actually ended up changing my plans and tacking on a whole bunch more by deciding to do the Pacific Crest Trail as well. The Pacific Crest Trail runs from California, California, Oregon, up through Washington. And that trail is about 2,700 miles long. And I am going with the person that I'm seeing. Their name is Cal. So we're going to hike the Pacific Crest Trail together. After that, in the summer, I will head over to the Continental Divide Trail, and I will hike the Continental Divide Trail. I'll start by myself in July.
Would you ever consider hiking the AT ever again?
I'm not sure that I would hike the entire trail again, just because there's so many other awesome trails to hike. I just want to see as much as I can and do as much as I can. But I absolutely will go back to the AT and do sections of it. I would also go back and help out hikers by doing what's called trail magic. Trail magic is when you, for example, you could go to a place where the trail crosses a road. You could bring your car there with a bunch of food and drinks and comfy chairs and music or whatever you want to do, and basically give hikers food and treats and make them comfortable when they walk by, because they're out there hiking all day every day. So something like a cold soda and a hot dog can mean the world to you when you're exhausted and starving and wet. So that's called doing trail magic. So I think I would love to go and do some of that on the Appalachian Trail sooner rather than later. I'm not sure. I won't be able to do it right away this year, but probably next year when I have a less intense hiking schedule, I'll spend some time at the Appalachian Trail. So I'll spend plenty of time there.
What sorts of transgender advocacy have you done?
So like I said, I do a lot of writing. That's one of the primary ways that I sort of try to get my voice out there and get my message out there. So I write for the outdoor website called The Trek. I also do speaking presentations. I recently did one at the Appalachian Mountain Club's annual summit. So there I just try to tell my story and try to give people some perspective on what it's like to be trans, especially in the outdoor community. I also, in a more local sense, I am involved with NAGLY, the North Shore Alliance of LGBTQ Youth, based out of Salem, and I'm on the board of directors there, and I've been involved with them for years. So I would say that my writing is there to encourage trans hikers and potential trans hikers to get in the outdoors and to try it out, because it can be really scary to put yourself out there for the first time. And it's also there to educate allies. My writing's not there to try to convince somebody who's already decided that they don't like trans people, or that I don't know that any amount of writing that I could do would be able to change something like that in one conversation. But I do think that by talking in a way that opens up conversations for people and gives people a little bit of context into one person's experience might allow them to think differently about trans people as a whole over enough time. And then working with LGBTQ youth through NAGLI is, I mean, it's so important to me. I've worked with youth my whole life, as you know, and I think that you can impress so much upon young people, and young people are the people who will be moving the LGBTQ movement forward. And by investing in them now and helping them, feel more safe in where they are, and by giving them the tools that they need to advocate for themselves in the future, I think that that's the best way to have long-term, real change, and that's what I want to see for our community.
So what does feminism mean to you, and did the completion of your AT hike sort of change that definition for you?
Okay, so what does feminism mean to me? So, I mean, I think that there's a misconception that people might say that feminism is about equality, and I see where people are coming from, but I think feminism is more about equity, and it's more about making sure that everybody from every background, anyone who's essentially anyone who's a non-man, non-cisgender man, has access to all the opportunities that somebody who is a cisgender man has. And those things are not a given, even though you may look on paper today and you may say, well, look, everyone's treated equally because here are the rules, like here are the policies that we have to make sure that everyone's treated equally, or treated the same and given the same opportunities. In reality, it doesn't always matter what the policy is that's written down somewhere. It matters on the way that people interpret it and the way that they carry out those policies. So if there could be a policy that says that nobody should be discriminated against, but if the person who's doing an interview for a job has some inherent biases that they're not aware of, and it's impacting the way that they assess that candidate, they could be, essentially like making choices that are, misogynistic, or whatever it is, whatever their biases are. And maybe they don't even know it. And that doesn't mean that they're like inherently a bad person or that there's anything wrong with them. It just means that they're not aware of the way that they've been raised, and the way that like the cisgender heterosexual patriarchy has sort of taught them that they should be, or how they should think. So I think that feminism is about sort of deconstructing that and asking people to look at why they think the things that they do, and try to come up with solutions that maybe go against what they were taught, but maybe will push forward to a better future. And I think that another main component of that too is intersectionality, which is that feminism isn't strictly about cisgender white women, right? It's about bringing everybody to the table, and it's about it's about making sure that the voices that are leading the movement are from a diverse set of backgrounds, and are not always, like a white woman specifically, whatever it is. So, being intentional about bringing voices that aren't heard as much to the foreground is a really important thing. And so I think that focusing on that from a feminism standpoint is going to be what helps move us forward. Oh, and then, sorry, there's a second part. Could you?
It was, did the completion of your AT hike change your feminism definition?
I don't know that it changed it. I would say it maybe reinforced it. I think that there were a lot of women through hikers out there. A lot still being less than half. It's primarily men. But there was a good percentage of women, and the women that I saw out there are strong and capable and from diverse backgrounds, and don't have the time or interest in engaging in whatever, if a man is trying to judge them harshly or treat them differently because of the fact that they're a woman. they weren't there to stand for that. And it was really great to see some really, really strong women and non-binary people, standing up for themselves. And I don't think that, again, you may not have seen outright misogyny on a day-to-day basis, but again, we're always talking about these, like microaggressions and things like that would impact somebody's experience and make it harder for them to feel comfortable in that space, or to feel welcome in that space, or to thrive in that space, because of potentially even like mindless comments that people make, or assumptions that people make, or stereotypes that people enforce about women.
So our last question is, what advice would you give to any women or non-binary hikers, or aspiring hikers?
Yeah. Aspiring or already hiking, it's, number one, just make sure you get out there. I know that it can be challenging, and finding ways to get in the outdoors on a regular basis can be difficult, but you don't have to go to the White Mountains of New Hampshire to get to a real hike. If you want to, you can look up the Bay Circuit Trail right here. Within 15-20 minutes you can be on a real hiking trail. It's 230 miles long. If you're listening to this, you're probably pretty close to the Bay Circuit Trail. So keep an eye out for that. Also, find community, find people. If you don't feel comfortable going out on your own, find community. There are women's hiking groups. Just go on Facebook, go on wherever, and start to look them up. And also, for me, social media was a really great way to connect with people. Just through Instagram, I made a whole bunch of friends before I'd even ever stepped foot on the Appalachian Trail, and that helped me feel a bit more comfortable, so that it's like the first day of school when you walk in and you don't know anybody or something like that, right? It can be really nerve-wracking, and especially being a woman or being non-binary, most of the faces are that of cisgender men when you step onto the trail, so you might already feel a little bit out of place. But yeah, so finding and connecting with people in advance, and then just sort of like doing your research and asking questions. You'll generally be a lot happier if you ask questions in advance, or do some Google searching, because I feel like for me personally, the more information I have going into something, the more comfortable I'll feel, especially when doing something for the first time.
Thank you so much for talking to me, and thanks for listening or watching. Make sure to tune in on March 17th for our second speaker, Claudia Foxtree.